Good afternoon, Abbotsford residents. I'm Mr. Pelican. I'm running for Commander-in-Chief of Abbotsford after what took place on my life and what was taking place with the Abbotsford's top police force here in Abbotsford. It was supposed to be a conspiracy, and this is what it was supposed to be. Abbotsford residents weren't getting any representation in the city because it was an elite establishment that set up to own it. I want to outline something today. Darren Braun, Henry's son, was the proving officer in the city of Abbotsford where his dad was the mayor. It was his own son, Darren Braun, that showed how his dad was winning the decisions over the general public, having councillors in his house to win the decisions which were collaborating. When Darren Brown opened that door, Abbotsford residents and myself went to the best men and women that know about insider trading and know that political politicians and where they're all involved, the RCMP mission. The attempt on my life to end it in broad daylight by Abbotsford's Henry Braun, the mayor, because he was going to get exposed after what his son told, and he knew he couldn't shut my mouth or Abbotsford residents' mouth. It would have brought everybody down behind the back doors and collapsed them. The police chief himself, Mike Sir, figured that the police name is bigger than anybody and everybody, and he went to work to cover it up for Henry Braun, the attempted murder. Also, Mike Sir was the one that helped Henry Braun over Councillor Mogel to make sure that the task force went out, that nobody would ever question it, and the Abbotsford police would be always protected. It was Darren Brown that showed how Henry could use the Abbotsford newspaper, rigging in the Chamber of Commerce, the city electoral officer, and everybody. These local institutions that he ran stronghold, it was the RCMP, knew that the former MLA, which was still the MLA, Michael de Jong, and the Attorney General should have called Henry out. He didn't. That sent the signal that the RCMP knew that Mike de Jong was with Henry, and same with Ed. Today I want to outline you something. I'm going to do about 30 or 40 videos on the Abbotsford police and showing you what they did in this town, showing you their costs, showing you how they ripped Abbotsford taxpayers, and exposing everything they have done. Crippling the Abbotsford police to their knees after the attempted murder, figuring that Mike Sir was one of them and they should cover it up. Giving no chance to the police in Victoria, the OPPC, to investigate now because it would be friends of friends to protect politicians. This is Ron Funk of Sage's The Property. It was Darren Brown that led and showed when it was going for development, the developer hid the sign on the community to make sure that it would get passed. And then when you walked in, the mayor and his council would say, oh, the sign's been there for a long time, you're too late. Blindsiding the community. It was Darren Brown that showed that Henry had former newspaper Rick Rakes, Tyler Olson, Vicky Hopes to write the stories only to make it look good. He went into the city to originate himself and his friends. It was his own son that showed that Erwin Braun, his uncle, was on the police board, showed Mark Workington and everybody. When Henry Brown and City, Ross Siemens, which were Henry's team of Abbotsford First, he knew he could control Abbotsford First, which was a slate to control most of the votes. They weren't giving Abbotsford representation, especially after Henry's attempted murder in broad daylight. They figured they were that strong they could blindside everybody because they were tied in the political ring. It was Darren Brown that showed the zoning changing from 200 to 455 without going back to the community plan. He also showed that the Abbotsford City Councils and Ross Siemens were running their signs directly on the developer, and Rob Funk was showing. He also showed Ron Funk's team in the Capriccia newspaper, which is Andy Sadu and Dave Sadu, the city councillor, running his team were running to help Ross Siemens to get in, all for special treatment. This is why Ron Funk faced no fines when he was knocking down the building and we had to go to Chilliwack. This is why he didn't face any infractions by bylaw. This is why he didn't face anything for the road or the endanger of the road. This is why he didn't face anything from the Abbotsford police because the mayor sat on board of the police. This is how the rocks were held down to Gladys Avenue on taxpayers' dollars to get the homeless out of there to help Show Suite and sales. The oldest game by developers. But this developer was tied to Henry Brown. Ron Funk and him were partners. Darren Brown also showed Pacific Peak home Devon Roy, Ed's son-in-law, the MP's son-in-law, and this is why Ed didn't call Henry out. You're changing the zoning. You're using Abbotsford City's taxpayers' money to originate yourself and steal from Abbotsford residents. It just didn't end there. This is what they did on Cooper's Farm. When Mark Workentine, the city lawyer here, owns a practice and he's a city councillor, went to England and ran his signs directly on the developer, it was to reward him. It was the city yesterday told me that I should start digging more and see what kind of conflict of interest Mark Workentine's in. He owns a land title office that was doing these deals. These are the city people that are coming forward, especially the women, after what took place. They knew Mike Sir had to come back and be charged for covering the attempted murder. It was because it was an elite, rich establishment. Nobody was going to do nothing and they were going to block the doors. And Abbotsford police weren't going to take statements to the top of them because they figured they were smarter than the community. Now I want to explain something to you and I want you to hear the in-depth of this. When Bob Rich, Henry Brown went into the city and pushed Bob Rich in the computer, his guys were out the window with me showing them, look at my boss. Your mayor shit-kicking my boss for jumping on the vehicles. When Bob Rich got let go from here, it was David Eby that hired him. When Mike Sir had to flee because of the attempted murder, he covered up and used his task force to ring me through the election, trying to run me out of town. The RCMP knew, you need to call the election. You jeopardize everything Henry has set up for the back doors, and Henry will have to attack you full force with Ross and everybody to get them jobs and everything he was doing. That is why I told you we want the city books, thanks to the RCMP. Then Mike Sir fled from here and they figured that they were going to cover it up by not taking statements or eyewitnesses. The big boys in the top of the Abbotsford police talking about gangs and how good they are. You can see the distance now by everybody. When Mike Sir left from here, he was hired by David Eby again into Surrey. But here's where it got a little difficult. When Henry Brown was pointed up in Kamloops to try to remove the hammerhead mayor by David Eby, city staff are telling me I should take a drive up there now and look at what Diverse was planning up there, and it'll explain why Abbotsford police were allowed to cover up what they were doing. And does David Eby even own into Diverse in these constructions? When you're pumping this much money into a conservative riding, it's easy to get it through because nobody will think that you're loading, so you're doing it in another riding. But this is what they were doing on the zoning change. The Abbotsford police that were under Henry's thumb and had, like Keelan Olenoff went to Henry's house. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine this? This is what everybody was dumbfounded. When Olenoff, Abbotsford's top elite police officer, said, you dropped the video of having Henry that Darren Brown gave you, counsel in his house, rigging the decisions on the public, in the lawsuit with homeowners, or I will personally effing bury you. That should have spoke loud, and it should have made sure that the Abbotsford police doors were opening and everybody sat down. Mike Sir couldn't do that. He ordered his guys to carry out threats that the police would be believed over everybody. We'll do our own investigations and we'll run down. You could see him collapsing. This is what Carney said it was about. It wasn't about me or Abbotsford residents. It wasn't that I went out with Henry's daughter or something like this, and if you think Darren Brown gave me information, wait till I show you what Henry's daughter did. It was about money. Henry stood to go to jail for insider trading with his son and everything. But let me explain something. Henry had all the Abbotsford Upper Police's phone number, the task force and everything, what made it very dangerous. They didn't even see that. When anybody wanted to get out of trouble, they'd just go to Henry and say, get the cops to drop the charges, because he was calling all the shots. They were friends here for a long time. This is why they weren't going to come down and take statements that Henry got in that car, left the city of Abbotsford, ran me over, left me for dead, and then dumped his car and fled from the scene. They figured they were smarter. Then they used the Abbotsford police to start threatening, and now they were trying to get the local other police forces in municipality to come to stand for him. But here's another thing. Usually when a police chief is out, that the next chief that comes in is somebody that knows this community, knows everything about this community, appointed, unless the RCMP are appointed in for insider trading and everything. It wasn't. Hand-picked out of Victoria was Colin Watts. I bet you, in my opinion, here's what happened. Bob Rich and Mike Sir sat down and said to David Eby, you need to send Colin Watts into Victoria. It's going to open it up on everybody. And they sent Colin Watts in here. Colin Watts, in his first week here, his officers were running wild. Basically, in my opinion, they said, you need to go shut Mr. Pelican and all them witnesses that come forward and that are helping. Came out, smashed my camera, smashed my phone. They have used the Abbotsford police, I understood, to data my phone. Let me explain that to you, which I'll do videos in front of the police. Your license plate is tied to your phone. So when they check your license plate in, it goes to your phone and not to your truck, and that's how they could change and chase me. When that gets out all across Canada and everywhere, it hurts law enforcement everywhere, and these guys were doing it for political favors. That's how they traced Mogil's campaign and my people. But there was a few mistakes made. The RCMP said, leave your phone at home, and then we'll see what the Abbotsford police do. So when the officer made a threat that I was in Abbotsford all day long and that disturbing the peace, and he had witnesses that he could lie for him, and he was going to jail me and threw my phone and camera. I knew he was full of shit because I was in White Rock with the multi-billionaire that has you under cameras, and I questioned and put out the invitation like the RCMP said to Colin Watts, an open invitation. He couldn't. He had to fold, and now they're going to use media outlets and their friends to say we're going to investigate it. Abbotsford can't let this happen. We don't know how many fucking favors, pardon my language, they have pulled, how many crimes they have covered up for their friends, how much shit they have done in this town and everything. When you took it out of the hands of the community from calling it out like Henry did in the city, that is done. But when you covered up Henry's attempted murder in broad daylight, that tells you how much that the top elites in Abbotsford were embezzling out of the city. The question now is, with all this on David Eby, is David Eby tied to these construction companies? Because you wouldn't be doing that knowing what kind of trouble Henry caused. You wouldn't be sending Henry into Kamloops knowing that there's eyewitnesses all over social media, Facebook and YouTube and everything, that Henry tried to end me in broad daylight and videos were made. And the Abbotsford police covered it up. I want to tell Colin Watts this. You have to, and you must be removed. You cannot be trusted. You sitting there and doing nothing was the wrong thing you could have did. Even the RCMP said, that's a dirty cop. And what should have been open for the Abbotsford residents is everybody now at the police building and in a meeting, and then Colin Watts picking up Keelan Olenoff and picking up his officers, and he wasn't doing it. That means the top elites were doing it. And what were they doing it for? Exactly what Carney said. I want you to look at this. This is what caused it. Insider trading. Ron Funkadiverse, when Nival went at it, remember Henry Brown took Nival on, then he took Mo on. It was his own son, Darren Brown, opened it. Henry figured he had that much money, that much political power, and he was up the top. I believe, in my opinion, that Henry can blackmail anybody, even to David Eby, and say, if I go down, I'm going to take you all down, because that's how Henry worked. This is why the Abbotsford police were on me 24 hours a day. I want to make sure something is very clear. I want to thank the RCMP mission very tremendously. Without their help and the information that I took to them and Abbotsford residents took to them, it was adamant that I made it clear to the RCMP and to Surrey that Henry was trying to get his officers to pull me over to drug traffic me and get criminal charges to get me out of the way because he knew Darren Brown told too much. When you say you have eyewitnesses that I've been drinking and everything, could you pull me over with a whole fleet of Abbotsford police? You better have them witnesses. Colin Watts believes that him and his guys should stay here because it's better for the community. You can see him crying that it's all about this community. In weeks to come, I'm going to unload videos and videos and videos exposing everything they did and showing it because the Abbotsford police weren't about this community. The question now to Colin Watts is, how many times have you phoned bloody David Eby? That there is organized crime. This is how 3,000 up at the Cooper farm got changed when Henry snuck in with his wife on the city to take it off. It was Darren Brown that showed me. His dad was in taking it off the city docks, which is your phone, so no people show up. and add councillors. So the question again to Mark Warkentine, the city councillor and lawyer that owns a land title, are you doing all these deals? And remember, Mark, ethics and morals and all this, your sign was on front and center. When Ron Funk an electoral office was brought to it, Funkster's team said, well, Funk was out of town. His superintendent said, we got it. We need to help Ross get in at all costs. He's going to help us. And this is what he was doing. The way to stop it is we got to take it down and we got to seize it, and the money's got to go back into Abbotsford taxpayers. Remember that woman in the Abbotsford police wouldn't turn a leg up for Bob Rich? She had to pay everything back. But because the elites were involved, Henry Brown, I told you, with partners with Ron Funk. I showed you Devin Roy had son-in-law, and this is what they were doing. Now they're pulling favors at the top, and this is why you see him beating on me. But what they never knew is this. They never knew John Rustad. They never knew all the political players and everybody who was in behind me at my house and everything. They gave the strength to the RCMP and said, these bastards are in organized crime, and this is what's taking for. There is no police force here. You have to look at the officers that are dying on the street and who came after them because they were setting people up and everything else, and how they could manipulate the other police forces to make it look like it and do it. It was the rich elites that needed the city bank account to do this. There's one way to fix it, and it's the way Darren Brown showed, to go after the city books, their developments, and their companies, and it'll open up. I want to make something clear to Ron Funk. If Henry Brown wouldn't have took the law in his hands and tried to end my life, it wouldn't have sparked massive people from helping in all kinds of offices to why somebody's trying to kill them, and why Abbotsford top police are blocking and running threats, and why they are. Let me explain. They were friends. They were friends. That's how Olenoff could go to Henry's house. This is how Mike Sir could pull it on Councillor Mogel. This is how Mike Sir could do that. This shit that this task force, we need them. They're running out at night, stealing and sneaking and doing shit, and you could see it. It wasn't about that. Now they need friends. I'm live. Abbotsford, British Columbia, Ron Funk of Sage.